Hello, hello, hello. I am the Linux Mitch. The other day I did a video showing how to do different things in the terminal, and it was rather long. It was a couple minutes over an hour. So today I'm going to do another video showing how to do different things in the terminal, and this time I'm going to try to keep it short. So let's get to it. So I'm in a virtual machine of Arch Linux with the Cinnamon desktop. And before the video, I disabled my login manager like DM. So when I reboot, I'm just going to go into the TTY. And I showed you in my last video how to disable and re-enable Light DM, the login manager. So I'm not going to show that in this video. So I'm going to open up a terminal. I'm going to make it full screen. I'm going to make the font a little larger. And if you look here, my username is Mensch, but the host name of the computer is Arch Linux. Now, of course, this is for new beginners in Linux. This is not for intermediate or advanced people, but you're welcome to watch it anyways if you are intermediate or advanced. So, like I said, my username is Mensch. The host name is Arch Linux. Now, the problem is if you have 3 computers and you have the host name of all of them called Arch Linux, and you want to SSH into them from work or from somewhere else, you're not going to be able to identify them. So it's better to give it a name that identifies it. Now, when you're doing installation, regardless of whether you're installing Arch the old manual way, or you're using the Arch automated installer, which is relatively new, a few years old, or you're installing Linux Mint, Manjaro, FreeBSD, Debian, MX Linux. When you're installing these distributions, the installer always asks you for a host name. And when I'm doing my installations on video, I always say, don't worry about it. You can change the host name after the fact. But I never show you how to do it. So today I'm going to show you how to do it. It's really easy. So what I'm going to do is type in sudo vim or nano or whatever text editor you like to use /etc/host name and enter. I'm going to put my password in, and you can change this name to whatever you want. If you have a Dell computer, an Acer computer, and an HP computer, you could identify it that way. So if this was the Acer, you could call this Acer, or you could call this computer in living room. And that's what I'm going to call it. You know what? I'm going to call this computer in back room. Let's do that. I know that's a long host name, but just for the video. Computer, you know what? Let's call it this way. Back room computer. I know that's a really long host name, but it's just for the sake of demonstrating how to do this in the video. Let's save the file. And let's reboot. So I've rebooted and I'm at the TTY because I disabled my login manager. So I'm going to type in my name, my password, and in the other video and in all my videos, whenever I go into a TTY, I always say I don't know how to make the font larger in the TTY, and I apologize for it. So in my last video, I did quite a bit of work in the TTY. And a viewer complained that the font was a bit too small and asked me if I could make the font larger when I do my videos. And then another viewer responded and told me how to make the font larger in the TTY. So that's what I'm going to do. So this is the command to type in to make the font larger in a TTY. I know it's hard to see, but I'll show it to you once I make the font larger. There we go. And that's the command. So the first thing I want to do is, so now we can see that my name is Mensch, but the name of my computer is Backroom Computer. So the host name used to be Arch Linux. Now it's Backroom Computer. Now I don't want to log into the Cinnamon desktop. So I'm going to type in vim xinit rc. And I'm going to comment out the cinnamon desktop, put the number sign there, and it deactivates the line. And I'm going to take the number sign out of awesome, and it's going to activate the line. So now it just activated the awesome window manager, or this file, and I'm going to save it. Now let's clear the screen. So now I'm going to type in startx, and I'm going to go into the awesome window manager. And there we are, we're in the awesome window manager. So let's open up terminal and see, I'm Mensch at Backroom Computer. Now, I'm going to take you to a website. I'm going to open up Firefox. And I'm going to type in Kernel Dot Org. So, this web page, if you've never been here, this web page is the Linux kernel archives. And basically, Linux is the kernel, and then the distributions use the kernel, and they put on top of it a desktop environment or a window manager. They put some applications into it, software into it, and that's your Linux distribution. And all the different Linux distributions use at least one of these kernels, if not more. So for instance, if you're running Manjaro is a distribution that's based on Arch Linux. And Manjaro gives you, in the GUI, so you don't have to go into the terminal, in the GUI, they give you the option of installing any one of these kernels without going into the terminal. Now, the thing about these kernels is that you can have more than one kernel installed. Now, right now, I only have one kernel installed, and let's see what it is. So I'm going to open up, go back to my terminal, and I'm going to type in uname R. So I'm running 6138 long-term support kernel. LTS stands for long-term support. So let's go back to the web page. So I'm running this kernel here. So this kernel is a long-term support. Now, it's always recommended that you run the latest and greatest kernel, especially if you have a new machine, because the latest and greatest kernel supports newer hardware. But if you're running an old computer, you could run one of these long-term support kernels, and I would suggest running the latest long-term support kernel. And now these long-term support kernels, they get updates, they get security patches and updates, so you don't have to worry about security. The only thing about the latest and greatest kernel is that it's better for the newest hardware. Now we have a stable kernel here that's going to be taken off the website soon. And that is this one here. And it's EOL, end of life. So this is an end of life kernel, which means it's no longer going to be supported. It's no longer going to get updates and security patches. And soon, very soon, probably within a week or so, it's going to disappear off this website. So all the different Linux distribution, the developers, they take these kernels and use them in their distribution to run at the lower end of their distribution, to run the distribution. So it's always recommended that you use the kernel that your distribution gives you. So if your distribution, some distributions run older kernels. And if your distribution is running an older kernel, and that's the only kernel they offer you, then you should stay with that kernel. You shouldn't start messing with it unless you really know what to do and what you're doing. So I'm running Arch Linux now. Arch Linux gives, I think, 3 kernels that you can do. One of them I don't know anything about, so I'm not going to talk about it. But the 2 main kernels that Arch Linux gives is the stable kernel and the long-term support kernel, which I'm running right now. Now, like I said, Manjaro, in the GUI, they have a GUI that allows you to easily and quickly install any one of these kernels. In Arch Linux, you have to do it in the terminal. So like I said, I'm running this kernel here. So let's go to the Arch Linux website. Let's type in archlinux.org. And let's type in Linux. So you can see Arch Linux made available to their users the latest and greatest Linux kernel on July 12th. Now, if we go back to kernels, they released this latest and greatest kernel was released on July 11th. So this one here, this one here, which is this one here, was released on July 11th, and the very next day, Arch Linux released it to its people on the 12th. Now let's look at the LTS kernel, because that's the one I'm running in this virtual machine. Let's search for it. So the long-term support kernel, which I'm running in this virtual machine, the kernel website released it on July 5th, and Arch Linux released it to its people on July 7th. Now, it's possible to have more than one kernel in your system. You could have many kernels in your system, and then when you're logging in, decide which kernel to log into, or you can just delete the one that you have now and put another one in. So I'm going to show you how to do that in Arch Linux in the terminal. So I'm going to close this my web page, and let's go to the terminal. So like I said, I'm running the long-term support kernel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to install the latest and greatest kernel. So to install the latest and greatest kernel in Arch Linux, you're going to do this: sudo pacman -s Linux. You're going to hit enter, and it's going to install the latest and greatest kernel in Arch Linux. If you have my zesh configuration file, all you have to do is type in this command: install Linux, and hit enter. Put your password in, and it's installing the latest and greatest kernel. Now, if you have more than one kernel, then like I said, when you're booting up, you have to do something and go into a screen and choose which kernel to boot into. But if you delete the other kernel that you don't want, then it's going to automatically boot into the new kernel. And that's what I'm going to do. So this is the command. I'm going to delete the long-term support kernel that's installed on the system right now. So I'm going to type in sudo pacman R Linux -LTS. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to delete it. But if you're running my zesh configuration file, you just have to do remove Linux LTS. Hit enter and remove it. Now, so what we've done now, we've deleted the long-term support kernel, and we've installed the latest and greatest stable kernel. But there's one more thing we have to do, because if you reboot at this point, you won't be able to get into your computer. Your computer will not boot. Now, there is a way to fix that, but that's for another video. So you have to run this command: grub mk config -o, and that's an O and not a 0. Boot grub.cfg. You have to hit enter and run this command and then reboot. Because if you don't, you won't be able to get into your computer. And like I said, there is a way to recover that, but that's for another video. Maybe. Now, if you're running my zesh configuration file, you don't have to type all that in. All you have to do is type in mk grub. That's it. If you have my zesh configuration file, that's all you have to put in: mk grub. And there it is. It's running the command. Now we're ready to reboot. So let's reboot. And we're at the login screen. Or we're at the TTY, because I disabled LightDM. So I'm going to type in mensch. I'm going to put my password in. I'm going to type in history because I don't know that command. And I'm going to type in this. 251 to make the screen larger. Now, I'd be interested if anyone watching this video knows how to make this command permanent for the TTY. So whenever I reboot into the TTY, the font is always large. If you know how to do that, send me a message and let me know how to do it. I would appreciate it. So now I'm going to log into Awesome Window Manager. I'm going to type in *X. And I'm going to open up a terminal. And I'm going to do uname art. So now we're running the latest and greatest kernel. Now you can have 2 kernels installed. So let's do that. I'm going to type in install. Now remember, you can only do this if you have my Zesh configuration file. Otherwise, you have to type in sudo pacman s linux LTS. So before I had the LTS kernel, I deleted it, installed the latest and greatest kernel. Then I deleted the LTS kernel, and then I made grub, and then I rebooted. Now I'm going to put the LTS kernel back in, make grub, reboot, and show you how to select the kernel to log into. So what I'm going to do is, and of course, if you have my Zesh configuration file, you just have to do this: install Linux LTS. Put my password in. Let's install it. And it's installing. It's just going to take a minute. And there you go. Now we have to make grub. So there's 2 ways to do it. Grub dash make config dash O, and that's an O and not a 0, dash boot slash grub slash grub dot cfg, and hit enter. Or if you have my Zesh configuration file, you can just type in make grub. We're making grub, and now we're done. And also, I'm going to restart LightDM because it's going into the TTY is a little bit of a hassle. So I'm going to do sudo system control enable LightDM. So from now on, when I reboot or shut the computer and start the computer, it's going to go into LightDM, my login manager. And there we are. So let's reboot. And right here at this point, you got to hit your arrow keys and stop it from booting in, because it will boot into one of the kernels automatically. But we have 2 kernels there. So you have to stop it quickly. And you only have, I think, 5 seconds to do it. So we're going to go to advanced options. And now we see we have the LTS kernel and the latest and greatest kernel. So we can pick whatever kernel we want to log into. So let's log into the LTS kernel. And now it's going to go into the login screen instead of the TTY because I re-enabled LightDM, my login manager. So I have my login manager now. You can choose whether you want to go into Cinnamon, Qtile, or Awesome. Let's go into Qtile. Let's see if it's stuck. It did. Let's type in my password. And now I'm in the Qtile window manager with my configuration file, of course. Now, I said I was going to save something for another video, but for another time, but I'm going to do it now. I think it would be appropriate. Let's say you're changing your kernels, but you forgot to make grub and you can't log into your system. How are you going to fix it? I'm going to show you. So let's open up. Now I can't use my mouse to open up the terminal because in Qtile, it's all keyboard driven. So I'm going to open up a terminal by holding down the mod key and hitting enter because I'm in Qtile. Now I could have done that in Awesome as well, because an Awesome window manager is also keyboard driven, and you could hold down the mod key and hit enter. But Awesome also has a lot of mouse flexibility and uses the mouse, and I made a menu. Well, there's a small default menu in Awesome, but I made the menu larger and added all my applications to it, but that's another story. So now we're in the terminal. So let's say now we have 2 kernels here. I'm going to delete both kernels. So I'm going to do delete, oops. I'm going to do remove. Linux and Linux LTS. Just for the heck of it, I'm going to take both kernels out, so there won't be any kernels in the system. Now the system will still run until I reboot, and if I reboot now, I won't be able to get into anything. Now I'm going to install. Which kernel should I install? Let's install the latest and greatest kernel. So I'm going to install Linux. Or if you don't have my Zest configuration file, you could type in this command, sudo pacman s Linux. So we're installing. So what I did is I deleted both kernels, the long-term support kernel and the latest and greatest kernel, and I'm reinstalling the latest and greatest kernel. And it's putting it in. It's putting it in, and it's installing it. So like I said, I deleted both kernels and I reinstalled the stable kernel. So now I only have one kernel in the system, the stable kernel. But let's say I forget to make grub to run that command, and I reboot. Let's type it in, reboot. So it's rebooting, and that's it. So whenever you change kernels, you always have to make grub. Now I can't get into my system. Try again. Can't get into my system. And this will happen to a virtual machine, and it will also happen to your bare metal hard drive. And if this happens, there's a way to fix it, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So first of all, because this is a virtual machine, I'm going to power right down. So I'm going to force it off. Force off. I'm going to say yes, and now I forced it off. Now, if this is a bare metal machine, you might have to unplug it from the wall. You either have to push the power button or unplug it from the wall, but you have to get it off. Now, if it's a bare metal machine, you're going to have a thumb drive with Arch Linux on it, with an ISO on it. And like I said, if it's a bare metal computer, you're going to have to maybe unplug it from the wall, power right off, plug your thumb drive in, boot onto your thumb drive. So when the booting, you're going to have to hit F12 or escape, or you have to know which key gets you into the boot menu. Now, if it's a virtual machine, which this is, I'm going to do it a little differently. Pretty much the same thing. So I'm going to put that away. And what I'm going to do is, because this is a virtual machine, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to CD-ROM. I'm going to browse. I'm going to browse again. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to where I keep my ISOs. I'm going to go to the Arch folder. And I'm going to open July. And I'm going to pick the Arch July 1st ISO. And I'm going to open it. And I'm going to go to my boot options. I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to click on this and move it up so that my virtual machine will boot into the July first Arch Linux ISO rather than into my operating system because you can't get into it. I'm going to apply it. And then I'm going to open up the machine. I'm going to boot into it. So now I'm booting into, in my virtual machine of Arch Linux, I'm booting into the July 1st Arch ISO. And like I said, if you're running bare metal, you're going to power down your computer, make sure you have the Arch ISO on here, and you're going to plug this in, turn your computer on, hit F12, 11, or escape, and boot onto the thumb drive in your bare metal computer, and it's going to be the same thing as this. When I'm on the live Arch ISO, I know how to set the font, so I'm going to do this. Set font here -132 and I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to clear the screen. So the first thing you want to do is mount onto your drive. So we're going to do an LSBLK, and the drives I have here is I have a VDA1, which is my boot drive, and a VDA2, which is my 20 gig hard drive. Now, if you are trying to fix a bare metal machine, it's going to probably be SDA1 and SDA2, but you do an LSBLK just to see what it is. Now we're going to mount into it. So I'm going to type in this command, mount dev VDA2 /MNT. Then I'm going to type in this command, mount dev VDA1 /mount/boot. I'm going to hit enter. Now I'm going to chroot into the system. We're going to do arch -chroot /MNT. Now I'm going to make grub. So now we are mounted onto our virtual machine system or your bare metal machine if that's what you're using. And you're going to make grub. So you're going to type in grub mkconfig -o, and that's an O and not a 0, /boot /grub period CFG. And we're going to hit enter. And there it is. It made grub. Now we're going to exit. And we're going to shut down. Oops. I forgot to say now. Shut down now. Shut down now. And there we go. So it's shutting down, and of course if it's a bare metal you're going to shut it down. And because this is a virtual machine, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to go to here. I'm going to take out the CD-ROM. Whoops. I'm going to go to here. I'm going to say no media. So I took out the CD-ROM, the live CD-ROM of Arch Linux. I took it out. And I'm going to go to boot options. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to unclick that. So now we're going to boot right into our drive. And I'm going to start the machine. Say yes. And I'm going to open up here. And we're booting in. Now, if this was a bare metal machine, you would just power down. After fixing it, you would power down your computer, pull out your thumb drive, and then turn on your computer, and it's going to be fixed. And you can see we booted into the system. So now I'm going to type in my password. And I'm going to open up a terminal. I'm going to make it a little larger. And I'm going to type in uname R. And we're running the latest and greatest kernel. And I'm going to close that. So in this video, I showed you how to change the host name in your computer, and that's going to work in Arch, Debian, FreeBSD, MX Linux, Linux Mint. It's going to work in all your distributions. Changing the host name is the same. Then I showed you something that's only going to work in Arch Linux. And I showed you how to change the kernel, how to delete a kernel, how to add a different kernel, how to have two kernels at the same time, and when you have two kernels at the same time, how to log into those kernels. And I also showed you how to fix your system if, after changing the kernel, you forget to make grub and you can't log into your system. So I hope you learned something in this video, and if you did, please like it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. I am the Linux Mensch.